Good morning.
Good morning, breakfast lovers, and a howdy do ya. Did you grow up hearing that phrase, Dan?
No, I don't remember that one.
I think it's an old radio hour with a religious bent
Hmm.
that my dad grew up hearing, and he would walk into, you know, the kitchen early in the morning with that kind of sing-song.
Hmm.
I looked it up once, but I've never been able to find a recorded version of whatever the show was, but it was apparently a popular radio show
Interesting.
way back in the day. He was born in the early 40s, so sometime before he was maybe 10-ish or so,
Hmm.
it
Yeah,
was a thing.
something that
I
actually went out
appreciate
over the radio. Yeah,
I
yeah,
appreciate the positivity.
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh,
Absolutely, absolutely.
Good
That
way to
was.
start the
I
morning.
suppose that's better than a. I was thinking it was a cereal commercial thing.
Could be. It could be all kinds of things. I don't know that he ever remembered where it was that he got it. It was just one of those early memes that like you hear it all the time every week. So,
Hmm.
although honestly, I used to listen to Casey Kasem every week and I couldn't tell you what his catchphrase was or how he introduced his show.
AT40. Yeah.
Which kind of goes to even some of the stuff for this week's book in
Hmm.
terms of storytelling is what are the things that like get into your brain that create either your subjective reality or an actual reality.
Right.
Everybody knows, or most people still know um uh Cronkite's, you know,
That's the way it was.
Cronkiteisms or, Paul Harvey,
Yeah.
and you
Page
know the
two.
rest of the story.
Yeah.
I
Or
remember Paul Harvey always doing the page three.
Page 27.
Yeah, yeah,
It's usually under four. Like
yeah.
page two, page two.
Hmm. That's funny.
But that served as a marker too for how long the story was. It was never more than a 3 or 4 page story. So even if you turn on the radio and you hear him say page two, you know where you're at. You know how much you might have missed.
Right. Right. Good evening, Tim.
Tim is muted.
Tim's muted.
Tim looks like he's in the corrugated metal bomb bunker.
Tim is no longer muted.
And Tim's
So
quit shaving,
it's
so I'm worried
plasterwork.
about I'm
We
worried
can
about
hear
the
you.
state of the world.
Yeah.
We can,
Yeah. So how
we
are
can,
things going there?
yeah.
What's really going on?
Well, I left my normal abode yesterday and then picked up a message that we need to take cover. And I was already under cover, so I didn't move.
Hmm.
Turns out it hit the building across the road
Oh,
from me.
jeez.
Oh wow.
But it's only debris. It wasn't the thing. But there was a little fire in one room on the
Hmm.
corner of a very small building for to buy.
Wow.
Although they seem to have got the Indian Ocean oil terminal today. Um,
Yeah.
I noticed on the BBC News. Um, and it's awfully quiet. So um, typically it's Ramadan, so it's a bit more difficult to tell. But
Sure.
um, if you went to, say, Dubai Mall, and within the mall is the entrance to go up, do the tourist thing in the Burj Khalifa. Typically, on an average day, on an average week, you'll see a couple of thousand people an hour go up that building.
Hmm.
This morning there was like six. Um, Quite a few Emiratis seem to have decided to go to their desert villas
Hmm.
away from the city.
Yeah.
Air India has restarted flights, but they periodically get stopped because something's up in the air.
Hmm.
Um, and a number of tax dodging type right-wing Brits are all berating the fact that they can't go home because apparently they left at the wrong time and they'll be liable for tax when they get back.
Oops.
And,
They can't go to like Guernsey or someplace?
Yeah, but except there's no international airport at Jersey that comes from
Oh,
here.
okay. Well, that makes sense.
You'd have to do at least one dogleg flight, if not two. I mean,
From North Africa.
don't forget, Jersey and Guernsey combined is probably the size of Rhode Island. So you haven't got. You'd be better off going to the Isle of Man, which is not part of the UK. In terms of size, anyway.
Yeah.
The only problem with that is it's far too close to the ILA. So you get bogged that way. No, I've spoken to a number of people, and some of the people that are here purely for tax reasons have gone back. Those that have got normal employment, etc., can't easily go because normally your employer keeps your passport until he lets you go. And that works for the 100,000 local versus the 1,000 local salary type people. I always managed to hold on to mine when I was at Atlantis, simply because I need to travel. Fortunately, my job allowed me to travel. So even when I was at Atlantis, I ended up going past Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, and Mauritius. Not Mauritius, Maldives. All for work. So then I always managed to, oh dear, I've stayed 4 extra days. What a shame.
Yeah. So
what, compared to here, what's not to like about Singapore? It rains every day.
Yeah. So and so we've got this Harari book, which actually does seem kind of appropriate for the moment, right? The whole, I mean, I guess beginning with the whole Sorcerer's Apprentice metaphor. Have we started a process that it's going to be difficult for us to stop? And then he goes on from there to this naive view of information.
Yeah, I must admit, he really caught me with his Sorcerer's Apprentice. It's one of the bits of music I like. Really got Mickey Mouse in it, but the Sugar Plum Fairy Dancing Hippos is the other favourite within that suite. So I quite like that. I quite like the structure so far, but even though he's referring back to his own book, previous one, or a 2016 one, a couple of instances, that I felt was a bit too much pat myself on the back type stuff.
He patted Ray Kurzweil on the back too, though.
Yeah, but in the prologue, particularly, it's only really Kurzweil, other than Zeus and various other. Obviously Gotha because of the Sorcerer's Apprentice, but sort of brackets see Disney film. A couple of bits and pieces I picked up was he seems to think, he comes over as thinking to me of mixing things that are out of date to current. If you gather enough information and you get knowledge from it, so a bit like Obsidian and cross-linking your notes type thing, You in theory get some wisdom out of it at the other end, but the wisdom he's talking about seems to primarily be, at least in the start, sort of the wisdom that we could have got by reading the Stoics, and we wouldn't need James Watt or Robin Whittle or John Locke even to carry on. But the event flips in the prologue, call it, yes, the bit that I pulled out really hard. There was just before the naive view of information. There's a bit with Orwell piped up. The bit before was what this crude analysis misses is that human power is never the outcome of individual initiative. Power always stems from cooperation between large numbers of humans. So if we extend that a bit, how is it that a large number of humans couldn't be at T100?
Yeah,
So-
I'm not sure I even sort of buy that. Although I guess from the perspective of stories, it could be true much of the time. I don't know.
Yeah, well, he's telling a story, but there's no detail to it. So the other thing that he seems to rely on is the cooperation and therefore the implication that there is a plan, even if it goes wrong on the first engagement with the enemy type thing. But if you look at, because he then goes on and talks about using Gotha for the childbirth, death rate, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Which obviously brings us to Hans Rosling and his bubble diagrams and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There might well be big cooperation now, but almost all of those wisdoms, i.e. the science of being able to study those numbers and make meaningful judgment from them, rather than just knowing what the average number is so often a singular person's activity. And I forget who it was, but there was the one doctor that was looking at the cholera outbreaks in and around that public water pump.
He brings that up in chapter 3, yeah. Yeah, he brought that up in chapter 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Though I think there's a point to that though of like, I mean, is that guy is sort of reporting on, the doctor, as I remember it, is also reporting on and gathering information that's gathered by other people, but he's bringing it all together. I don't know if so there's a flip to that. He's singularly doing that. He's got this singular idea of, oh, maybe it's got something to do with the water. So he gets the reports that all these other people have come together, I think.
He also, in his general chit-chat element, without particularly picking up one example, he talks about biodiversity collapse and climate change. And oddly enough, there's the results of a 30-year project in Scotland has come out, where they literally managed to fence off one of the last remaining relatively dense parts of the old Caledonian forest. And it's the usual problem of no predators, so the deer are taken over, too many sheep. So they kept the deer and the sheep out for like the last 30 years on 2 plots. And the results are quite interesting. One plot had a decent number of viable trees of a mixed species mix. But the other one, the trees were all very senile. And so they haven't really rewilded themselves. And so they have been taking seeds from other places to try and make sure they get a diverse genetic base, and they've been planted. So they've got one planted and one non-planted. And they are on the verge of saying, yes, we can release links, and we'll use links as the apex predator to effectively be like your domestic solar panel to the general public to say, you don't need to be scared of this.
Yeah.
So
on the assumption that the lynx will be the keystone species.
yeah, but on the basis, rather like the wolves changing Yellowstone, the lynx will start the process. They are, once we've all got used to having, this huge bloody great big pussycat outside our door,
Don't try
we can have a rather big doggy type thing. And so the thing that I thought of that, and I haven't yet got to that, I don't think, in terms of how he explains it in terms of this book, is I have a bit of wisdom that is stupid example, that's about electrical cables. Can I use any of that wisdom about my water pipes so I can transfer it from one small area of work to another small area of work, and then maybe to another small area of work? Because that wisdom should be transferable rather than knowledge. The fact that I know what the conductivity of a cable is doesn't tell me anything about water flow down a pipe. We always use it as an analogy, as in volts, resistance, and impedance, right? And it's the annoying thing, of course, with school physics is one lesson you get told use water flow as the analogy for your electric stuff. About 4 lessons later, you get told use the electric one as the analogy for the water flow.
Right.
It's always seemed to be like chicken and egg, but I know eggs.
And it's like, how much can you actually teach through these metaphors before it kind of goes off?
I know eggs were there before chicken. Yeah. So I know that answer the same way as I know it by looking at it. I know exactly how long a piece of rope is or a bit of string. I never, ever fail with that. And it swung me a few quid. It's exactly twice half its length. So, and then the naive view of information was quite interesting. I thought there was there's the quote about Zuckerberg's an early statement about Facebook's goal was to share more across the world, to make it more open. And yet, within the last few months, I've been pushed off Facebook because I called out a turf for being a turf.
Well, you got to remember,
and with absolutely no commentary, no chastisement, nothing. Just suddenly the account stopped working.
Oh wow!
The downside was, of course, the turf was J.K. Rowling. And so surely she's got an army of followers who periodically spend half an hour searching for any mention, etc., etc. And they all band together and make 500 complaints in a minute.
You got to remember the other part of the thing, though, is the part of power as having the ability to make the myth. And it's a myth that Zuckerberg's point is Facebook should connect the world and do the thing. It's a lovely, fun myth, but is it actively doing that? It may have been doing that 2007 through 11 or 12, but it was doing it for a business purpose to mine people's information as if it were oil.
Yeah.
And I would posit that it's not doing that now. Big chunks of Facebook are actually dividing the world and even dividing individual families who are all friends with each other on Facebook.
Hmm.
I know at least of three individual family members who've blocked me because I believe in evolution. No. And it's like, okay, like that's fine and lovely. Just, ignore me when I post about evolutionary theory. Like, just,
Right.
move on with your life. But that doesn't happen.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Um,
I quit Facebook in 2019, and I haven't felt it made my life better.
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't
I
miss it one bit. And I
I
was very
generally
active before.
I generally quit it. I use it now only for there's maybe three typewriter groups that exist only there, and it's literally I read them to mine information for
Hmm.
myself, and that's it. But I don't.
Yeah.
Well, I did notice the extreme plagiarism on your site.
The which? Extreme plagiarism?
Yeah, you said you were going to mine the information from those three groups. It
Yeah.
shows. It showed.
Yeah. Well, actually the amount that I actually get from those Facebook groups is fairly minimal. I check them once a week, but I get most of my information from old manuals, repair manuals, and other stuff, nobody else is reading
I
anymore.
had
Hmm.
I had a few moments not reading the book, and I caught up with all your mail. Nice to
Really?
get.
Okay.
Although oddly, I haven't had one from Dan recently. He's been very quiet.
I have been kind of quiet. I've got one. I wrote one for today that I'll probably publish today. But yeah, I haven't been writing. I've been kind of running
Because
back.
I got overwhelmed with the tsunami that came through when the term started,
Yeah.
and with all the changes of how he's organising his
Yep.
online life.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Now I've got to. Yeah. Now I've got to get. I'll be going. Yeah. I'll be going off traveling, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to organize that. How I'm going to travel and blog simultaneously. So I'm looking forward to that. That'll be kind of next week's project. One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting about this was he does. I thought he did a kind of a good job, or at least I like people sort of setting the scene by sort of reaching back into the past and saying, well, in 1858, this was happening that sort of parallels what we're going to talk about here. Um, and then, and these, kind of these ideologies or these expectations of what information is going to do. And that does seem to be kind of part of the. I mean, there are a bunch of assumptions there. I mean, and we've been talking about this from the very beginning. The yellow book on top of your shelf there, Chris. Um, yeah, that we've got that we've got some type of commitment to this enlightenment sort of idea. And I was thinking about this in the context, the thing that I was working on this morning. I was sort of thinking about this in the context of all of these religious claims that are being made to justify things.
I did like that he very quickly blamed religion as being effectively one of the primary bad organising principles.
Well, yeah,
And I did wonder whether he was really looking at it from a Abrahamic point of view rather than anything else.
mhm. Well, it's
the
weird that
wo-
there's a conflict or there's a conversation going on, or there's a difference of opinion about. I mean, a lot is being said about religion in online right now, and both in video and in online print or whatever, about the idea that like the idea that you know Tucker's religion um, is more amenable to peace. That it's some type of George Bush kindler, gentler kind of perspective, right? Where, and I do at least appreciate the idea that he says, in my understanding of my religious tradition, collective punishment is never okay, right? Which is like, good for you. But it also kind of seems to be that the whole point of the Enlightenment project was not to have to depend on these kind of supernatural revelations of these ideas, but to kind of formulate them on a more universal basis.
Well, that's the tough part
I lost
about
track.
religion, though, is there are pieces that we choose to ignore, or that the religious right is choosing to ignore, that are, core tenets of that religion that's been around for 2,000 years.
Right. Well, and there's so much that you can find in there, right? And that was one of the things that, in my brief few years that I was sort of associated with my wife's church before her death, it was an Episcopal congregation, and I was very surprised that they had a lectionary that had, that was sort of like a highlights reel of all of the good stuff, all the stuff that they wanted to sort of emphasize out of both the Old Testament and the New, and each week in the service they would have, a reading from the Old Testament and then a reading from the New, but they would be very targeted, right? And there were these big swaths of the books that they would completely ignore and bypass and really sort of, it seemed to me, out of a sense of embarrassment.
No, but I find hilarious too is no one ever talks about the character arc of God, because he's a wrathful, vengeful God in the beginning, and then he's the bright, happy, forgiving God, at the end of all of these other stories.
Until you get to Revelation, and then he sort of reverts.
Well, there is a book I came across decades ago that is sort of I think it was called A Short Biography of God, and it is going exactly to that, particularly in the Abrahamic traditions of, the different versions of what you're exactly talking about. I mean, I could go dig it out of I'll find it somewhere.
But talking on that, for one person that you can easily get good information on, either through YouTube videos of debates, hour-plus long debates, or from his writing, to be Christopher Hitchens. Because he never took prisoners, and one of his big ones that he repeats several times in different places is the words we are told that were sent by God along the lines of "Give me your children." Who's the author?
Jack Miles, God, a Biography. I'll type it in.
All right.
It's from God.
It's from who's the English Anthony somebody, English philosopher who's done relatively short books, one of which is like a philosopher's version of the Bible and a God thing. And I saw him in the lounge here a couple of years back, going back to the UK, I assume, when he's leaving the bar. And he's got about 20 odd small books, a couple of large ones. And the other thing that came up somewhere else. Oh yeah, this. So we were a week into the Iran Gulf War 3, whatever you want to call it, and a piece of news came across my desk, as it were, and the bomb disposal were at it in Dresden, next door to the Fraukirche. They're extending a bridge, and they dug up one of the large British bombs from, they thought was from the big firestorm bombing raids that is in Kurt Vonnegut's V.
Right.
And So if Kurt can walk through that and live, I can walk through these bad shootings from the Iranians. I mean, we've got less than 10 people dead into like well into week 2, and most of the damage has been from just sort of rubbish that's falling out of the sky after it's been shot. So, but it's we're a city of 3 million and we've had 10.
Yeah.
But we say that Dubai is a city of 3 million, with 9 million from UAE, and UAE has under 10 dead.
Yeah.
They're clearly not that accurate. And now, of course, you've got the quirk of Hamas is asking Iran not to target the Gulf states.
Huh. Hadn't heard that.
No, well, you probably won't get to hear of that on the US news. You need to go to BBC.
Yeah.
The BBC UK rather than BBC US, because they now started charging to put a payment, I understand, on account of the fact that we're an unreliable ally, etc.
Okay. So,
but so far, though, the one real fact I think he's actually got wrong was and still back in the prologue, every smartphone contains more information than the ancient Library of Alexandria. Every smartphone has normally way too many cat pictures. It has access. It has access to Wikipedia, providing it's got a signal. So it's those actual realities that it's so easy to let slip by because they're not really that big.
Right. Because it was just a hand waving moment.
Yeah, it's just bad. It's hand waving but bad writing.
Yeah. I agree.
What I didn't know, of course, was about the Bletchley Declaration, which follows that, where there's 20 plus 30 almost, I think he says, countries have signed a declaration not to let AI get away from it. And that's had
best efforts basis.
New Zealand come on board more recently when it was originally set.
Yeah.
Well, what's curious though is they signed this thing, and we just read Altman's book about Anthropic and the early efforts for, hey, we're in AI, but we're about AI safety. And we've already seen, even at the end of that AI book, the weakening of, and the continued weakening of, how do we make AI safe? And even in the last week and a half, there's an issue of U.S. government military use of AI and whether that's good or bad, or are we going to have this contract or not?
Well, and the potential use of AI in targeting that first strike that ended up dropping bombs on not only the girls' school but 2 empty buildings apparently.
Yeah.
So, but that again, was that a function of AI, or was that just, oftentimes when people are complaining about AI, I think, well, okay, is this just a snazzier version of Wikipedia or of some other, available, previously available?
Well, I look at it as on cell phones, old cell phones, there was text prediction. So as you start typing a word, it'll guess what your word is because it's got all the words, and it knows the frequency, and it can guess where you're going.
It's exactly how large language models work.
And I think that's where AI is right now, is it's, a step or two beyond that text, T9 text prediction.
Right.
And pattern matching.
Yeah.
But it has not been great at, and I've been watching closely a lot of Terence Tao's work in mathematics for AI's ability to be able to prove and solve mathematical problems that we heretofore haven't done. And it's done a handful of very small, easy problems that there were bits and pieces of in the literature that it has stuck together, but it's
Mhm.
not, it's still not solving
Yeah.
mathematical quandaries in the way that humans do. And
Mhm.
it's getting very low level, low hanging fruit
Yeah.
is really where it's made, but it hasn't said, oh, here's the answer to all of the remaining Hilbert problems.
Right.
And I think it's going to be quite a while before we get there. But I think what was super a pointy barb, and I can't remember if it was chapter 2 or 3, where he's talking about bureaucracy
Yeah.
and bureaucracies, we define our drawers and what goes in each drawer. And if we
Mhm.
don't have, if there isn't a line on a form that I can put in, the bureaucracy essentially just ignores my idea because
Mhm.
it doesn't have an easy drawer to put it in. But where it gets really scary is when the AI becomes the bureaucracy, then which drawer do I fit in? And I have no ability to fight against it other than my fellow humans around me in my family or my tribe who may, you know, help rise up against whatever AI is out there. But
Mhm.
that seems to be so far after the introduction, one of the few times that he pulls out the word artificial intelligence is in that section.
Mhm. Well, and
So
I hope he's going to
he's
come back, yeah, around to this idea of, because he does, he's got all these nice little simple diagrams, right? And he's got that one where he adds, from the naive to the complex or sophisticated view, he adds order to power, right? So you've
yeah.
got truth and power, but then then the more sophisticated view is truth, order, and power. And that, I guess, yeah, I think he's developing this theme about sort of descriptive versus normative, sort of information,
Yeah.
right? When are we using, when are we actually seeking the truth, and when are we
Creating it.
making truth claims to justify other agendas?
Yeah,
Well, I
which
mean,
is
but
very
even
common.
but even when he's talking about the documentary situation, in the documents, I have read the first 3 chapters. I have not got. I just finished chapter 3. I haven't gotten chapter 4, and the prologue was terrific. It was interesting too.
Mhm.
But I mean, I think creating consensual reality, the contracts, everything he's really talking about in documentary, in the documents and and the bureaucracy stuff, where he's, you know, and I think this, where we actually are creating a truce that,
Mhm.
it's not a, okay, this, there's a rock here. It's a, we all agree that you own that farm.
Yeah.
Or his story about, his own, his grandfather not being able to prove that, he's no longer a Romanian, even though he's born in the same place he was, but because he can't find, because somebody burned the documents.
Right.
But that creating truth, which is very different. Again, it's prescriptive.
Right.
Truth, is a very different sort of thing. I found that I found very interesting. And
Right, right. Well, and I wish he would have. I kind of wished, even back in the introduction or in the early chapters, he would have said more about sort of this. I mean, he would have compared or contrasted the Cher Ami. I thought the pigeon story was really interesting,
yeah,
but but put that up against Louis Brandeis saying that the remedy for false speech is more speech, right? Would more speech have
Yeah.
changed the reality of or the truth of the Cher legend or in a
Well,
meaningful
I think
way?
that's the bigger thing he's trying to get at in this
yeah,
book is we all tell ourselves a story, which is one of the underlying mythologies of the rose-colored glasses application of technology with respect to AI
Mhm.
is is more information really going to solve the problem, or is it going to make things worse or hairier, or because there is also all the information about all the biases we all individually bring, and are those biases going to help or hurt, particularly when from a David Graeber perspective of there are different groups of people in the world who have chosen to live different types of lives, whether they've done so, tacitly, explicitly, or hey, you're born into this, if you're born into a family of, Christian nationalists in the Deep South, it's very hard to extract yourself from those communities because you have to eschew all the people around you and physically move or leave or create new communities.
Right.
Or quit
Somehow
Facebook so you don't
fight your way
talk.
back to kind of first principles and rethink everything that you grew up understanding.
And this also presupposes that then the thing you move to next is better than different from whatever the thing you came from.
Right.
Now, could you be going to, I often think it would be interesting to move to Australia, join an Aboriginal group, totally change my way of life, but it also, the hurdle for doing that, I need to learn a new language. I need to learn a new way of life. I need to learn the new stories, the new mythologies. And does that improve the quality and the status of my life? Maybe, and as war impinges more and more, maybe it actually would.
So you would also be bringing in because you would yet again, you'd be another white invader.
Well, no, I know enough of the difference anthropologically of the one versus the other.
Yeah.
I think I could reasonably pull it off, except for my uber white guy, Welsh, Irish, Scots presentation. That I could maybe pull it off, although I would still be marked as other within that tribal society. But there were a few times too I wrote the word moiety in the margins of my book here several times because there are ways that, and one of them was the German intermarriage and the death of children in early stages. And I'm kind of curious to see if indigenous moieties actually help prevent those early childhood deaths in those societies. And it's going to be hard to try and find what that data and research would suggest. But there were indigenous ways of tracking who your relatives were and how you married or intermarried, and rules and laws for how that worked, and who you could marry and who you couldn't. And specifically, I think a lot of it was designed through trial and error to figure out who you could marry and successfully have kids with. And Western culture forgot a lot of that.
Wasn't this actually in one of the earlier books? I forget that, or I just relatively recently read that, one of the main things that happened with sort of the medieval Christian church until relatively recently was that, delegitimizing, making cousin marriage bad. I don't remember where that came from.
There's a guy with a book called Weird Western,
maybe that's where it was. I haven't read that book, but
we've mentioned it before.
I just recently came across this, though, and I don't remember where in the world of a major impact that Christianity had on Europe, on Western Europe in particular, was cousin marriage bad.
Way back.
Page 19 in the introduction for that moiety note. Rhesus disease.
So way back when we were talking about Braver and Debt and the intermarriage thing of how you manage the gene pool came up a couple of times, and they're using big multi-clan, multi-tribe fairs to exchange people. And at that point, I'm pretty sure that I piped up with Derek Shiver's story. He was here a few years ago and was speaking to an Emirati about given there are so few of them, and so obviously marrying your second cousin twice over is very easy because there aren't that many. And the Emirati piped up and says, but we keep records. And one of the records is, oh, by the way, my family records go back to the first house that my ancestor built. And he said, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. And then and he's clearly talking about it in a timeline. And he then said, Islam happened. And so Derek says, so what you're telling me is you've got 2,000 years worth of paperwork. He says, no, 1,200. 1300. And that struck me as, because one of the things, having already mentioned Hitchens, one of the things that Hitchens mentions is obviously the Abrahamic God sends people to illiterate goat and camel herders. Almost everything in the Bible is in a 500-mile circle of wherever the century. Mm-hmm. Although that doesn't reach Baghdad and the Persian sort of interaction. But it's like, why, if God is that good, why would you send him to a bunch of illiterate goat herders rather than send them to somewhere civilized like China, where there is a complete and adequate bureaucracy that would have been able to make sure the maximum number of people, as quick as possible, got the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, so that always sort of tickles the fancy. In the community chat, I dropped a cartoon that has come up this week, where the gist of it is, it's not very good when your smart bombs think you're stupid. So there's an American plane with a pilot sticking his head out the window, and there's like 6 or 7 smart cruise missile type bombs that are, what were you thinking, creating economic havoc around the world in a volatile region? You just launched the war without clear objectives, and then one of the 4 bombs in the rack on the plane says, it's not very good when your smart bombs think they're stupid. The other oddball thing from a British point of view is the slap on the wrist, apparently, that Keir Starmer's had by saying that he would send the aircraft carrier to Cyprus to help with the odd few missiles that are getting out to Cyprus, which is 2 British air bases and a US-UK listening post up on top of the mountain. That is how we see into Gaza and Israel and Lebanon and Jordan and Iraq, etc. And back a little while ago, we said about community punishment is not on. And in a modern context, that makes it into the Geneva Conventions, etc. That almost nobody seems to have worried about them for Gaza, for instance.
Well, and that seems to be kind of a I mean, if we're talking, and maybe to go back, I don't know if this is the introduction or chapter 1, where Harari says he's talking about the Passover tradition, right? And he says they're supposed not only to tell the story of how the descendants of Jacob escaped slavery in Egypt, but to remember how they personally suffered at the hands of the Egyptians, how they personally saw the sea part, how they personally received the 10 Commandments from Jehovah at Mount Sinai. So this idea, I mean, so really, Tim, what you're talking about is sort of these dueling traditions of fake knowledge, right? That of mythology, right? Because I mean, Bibi Netanyahu has at least 3 times since 2023 used the term Amalek. And actually, I think he first used it in 2010 in a speech at Auschwitz, and so this idea, and it's from the reference that he's making is from Deuteronomy, but it reappears in Samuel, where the prophet Samuel is ordering on behalf of God the king, Saul, to wipe them out, right? To, to sort of, to practice collective punishment, to wipe them out, and their wives and their
Which is a
children and their infants and their sheep and their oxen
Genocide.
and their donkeys, and
it's a repeat comment from Hitchens where he doesn't pick them all up in one go, but I think he manages in one speech or another to go through the whole catalogue.
Yeah. Well, so it's a question, again, it's a question of there's so much in these books that you can pick and choose what it is that you want to focus
It's that
on.
same picking and choosing that lets us decide, oh, should we have slavery? Should we not have slavery?
Right.
Because there are examples. But it's also another kind of more modern version of this kind of picking and choosing which mythology and stories we want to believe is, right now in American government, there is a massive movement to root out DEI,
Mm-hmm.
the boogeyman. And we need to do that because we have this mythology of the lost cause, and we want to go back to this slavery and big hierarchy. But to be able to pull that off, we definitely can't have DEI because that goes against the mythology of the lost cause and how do we get back to where we came from a white supremacist perspective.
Right. And Matthew Stewart, in that recent book, Nature's God, The Heretical Origins of the American Republic or whatever, he goes out of his way to say that, well, statistically, in the first half of the 19th century, Christianity was used more than anything else in the South to justify slavery, right? And and people were making biblical arguments about this, and it was and he goes and he has a whole chapter where he talks about sort of the atheistical, or at least the deistic or pantheistic nature of the people who became the original abolitionists before. Again, there was a religious element of that too, but initially they were all accused of being atheists because the counter argument was so religiously based. Sorry, go ahead, Will.
I mean, you had Shakers and Quakers, and my mom's a history was a history. She's still alive, but she's retired history professor, and her interest was in sort of the New Harmony stuff, the New Harmony settlements in Indiana, and the like. And because at the same time, that we're having this situation with the justifying slavery using Christianity theoretically. You've got this enormous sort of revival happening in the 1830s, 1840s, etc. of people who are absolutely completely rejecting that and having sort of again, Shakers, Quakers, Mennonites, all these other people who
Right. Well, the original Harmony community was Rappite, right, which was a religious, kind of communist religious sect. But then, then when Robert Owen arrived, it became, he tried to reformulate it on a secular basis, and of course, what he got wrong was the idea that the Rappite farmers were just so much more productive for no reason, right? And it had a whole lot to do with their worldview and their religious commitments. So his farmers were not quite as effective. But then when Francis Wright came,
barely had kids,
Shoba,
too,
right? I'm sorry?
And they barely had kids too. That was another problem.
The Rappites.
Yeah, am I remembering that right? Yeah. It's difficult to have a thriving community when you don't reproduce.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the Cathars, were the original example of that, right?
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah. So there are. So I guess it's less. Yes, I agree, but it's less. It's less of a thing for me anymore. I used to be super enthusiastic about the secular position, right, and tracing the and because of a lack of people doing it, I think I also thought, well, okay, I'll be the one to tell this story. I think it's interesting. It's more interesting, probably and actually, I think Matthew Stewart does a good job in this recent book of kind of tracing this idea of becoming less focused on specific revelations and on specific supernatural elements. So This, so these ideas of these Enlightenment ideas that become sort of deism and then later become universalism, which continues kind of to exist within a religious tradition, but a less, one that's less focused on specific putative events and acts of God and miracles and all that. And it's like, and it reminds me of Hume's essay on miracles that he left out of the book in its first edition, but then put in later.
I am curious, and for everybody in general, but Dan specifically, in the prologue on page 30 or XXX, if you have your physical book, he kind of gives a subtle redefinition to history and what history is. And he says, history isn't the study of the past, it's the study of change. History teaches us what remains the same, what changes, and how things change. And I'm curious, what your gut reaction was when you saw that as something that's, I think, fits and describes history, but it's a slight turn in mythology of what I think the broad populace thinks of as history.
Yeah, well, I that resonated a lot with me. I'm more drawn to these questions of change over time and of the causes of change and the consequences of the changes more than I am on. Yeah, I think that on events, on the nailing down a particular place and date and time and person, I think is less relevant. It is the thing that traditional histories, especially ones that support cultures or nations or groups of some type, seem to be more focused on.
One of the things that struck me, and sometime in the last year, I read it was a historian talking about the origin of jaywalking. And it happened at the juncture between horse and carriage and cars. And you could walk across the street in the horse and carriage time and not cause problems. But when cars are going faster, it's an issue for the car lobby, and cars are replacing horse and buggies to have people walking across the street because you're more likely to cause accidents or get killed or be injured. So it's a shift in law to make jaywalking illegal, and it slowly happens everywhere.
Right.
But it's the car lobby that knows, hey, if we can't get this through, it makes it harder for cars to exist on roads.
Right.
So we'll put this subtle little thing in, and it makes a dramatic change that we still live with today, but almost no one or very few people will jaywalk unless they kind of look around to see, are there cars coming, and then they'll go. But we still, enforce jaywalking, not to the level we did before, but it's those small changes in history that we don't question now. Nobody even thinks about it.
Well, there's probably a technological element to that, right? Horse-drawn, omnibuses are moving at about the same speed as people on foot. So that's less of a thing. But I do wonder, if some place like, Commercial Road in London, right, which got wide and had, tons and tons of traffic, in the 19th century, became a place even before motorized vehicles, where it was more practical to have some type, to not wander out into this wide street with all this stuff happening in it.
There's some of this also, though, with, again, there's in New York City, actually, I think, is where it was really more about trolleys. There was, there was sort of called Death Alley or whatever, where, because the streetcars, people would get run over by the streetcars.
Yeah.
That's before automobiles, but not much before.
Right. But the velocity was similar.
The velocity for the trolleys was much faster, and you'd have Ninth Avenue, people are dying all the time, sort of thing, and sort of, I think that may have been an early thing. And a quick, interesting cultural point. Now in New York City, jaywalking happens all the darn time. If you've ever been to Tokyo, Yeah, I remember being. I visited Tokyo once, and I remember it's like 7 a.m. one morning. There's no traffic on this street at all, but the sign is up there, and there's me and two other people, and we're waiting. And this one guy starts crossing, and the other guy there, and he's not a cop or anything. The other guy there starts hissing at him. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because there's a social contract.
Well,
Yeah.
That back in the early to mid 70s, Dad was in Moscow, and he's a driver, so he's the worst for jaywalking. And of course, it was like his first visit and the first couple of days or whatever. So he's hopped across the street, albeit on a striped crossing. And the policeman stops all the traffic and gives him a right in the middle, and the whole of wherever central Moscow he was in was stopped for like 3 minutes.
Talk about collective punishment.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, it's the public hanging to indicate the mythology to everyone around.
Right.
But that's the thing too, is your story in Tokyo is the mythology is so ingrained into that one guy, he's willing to chastise somebody when there's no traffic.
Right.
But it's much the same with the lifts. The first person in the lift in Japan takes control of the lift and does all the push button.
Huh.
But everybody that then gets in afterwards.
Interesting.
And it's just ingrained and just happened.
When I was 5 years old in Austria, we were probably in Vienna. We were in one of the parks, and there was a wide sidewalk out on the outskirts of this park, and my sister and I were just running around like crazy. We had all kinds of energy, and we ran out the gates of this park onto this sidewalk, which I mean, to me it was like 20 yards wide. It was a wide sidewalk, and this woman, this passerby, older lady, starts yelling at us in Austrian dialect, and we didn't know what the hell she was saying. But my parents kind of come rushing out, and she says they were running in front of streetcars, and of course we weren't. But we got in trouble for this, and I always thought it was very unjust. But the story that we were told was, look at all these guys around here with one leg. They ran in front of streetcars. And of course they didn't. They were in World War II. But that was the story that we were told, was all of these people ran in front of too many streetcars and lost their legs. And so watch out.
So and he doesn't bring this up, but what about the old wives' tales as part of the mythology we tell ourselves to create order and structure in our society?
Yeah.
And it's the soft mother power that often, I'll use the word, trumps, the broader, male political power.
Yep. How long it'll be until we take back that word.
And then that's and I think that's one of the things he is ultimately going to make the point of, or he signals it in the opening with the prologue, is what happens when AI is the one making the rules and enforcing the rules.
Right.
That becomes the new mythology. How do we?
Right. Well, and
especially
because of what Will alluded to earlier, right? The idea that that this is just based on frequency, right? When he says while the Bible has done a poor job in representing the reality of human origins, migrations, and epidemics, it has nevertheless been very effective in connecting billions of people and creating the Jewish and Christian religions. So what is going to be truth? Is truth just going to be the statement that is made the most frequently? Because you can definitely find some absurd claims.
Well, that's the thing too,
that are repeated and repeated and repeated billions of times.
It's such a strong story that because AI is a textual based medium, it's not getting the oral stories or frequency of stories for things like Homeric mythology, oral indigenous mythologies, even Gilgamesh is not going to be as heavily represented in these pieces, much less all the things that are never put down into text that we
Right.
don't know about.
Right.
And then that then determines where the story goes from here.
Right.
And he
Or
doesn't he doesn't talk about it, but while he's talking about these stories and the importance of words and telling the stories we tell each other, he hasn't yet mentioned, I don't think, the idea of erasure. And and there are definitely, colonialist powers come in and erase
right.
the old stories, or even in early Christianity. I've been reading, it's a 12th century, and she's one of the first Anglo-Norman writers, and she's writing in French for an um, English power base, but Marie de France, 12th century, is writing these what are called lays, and there's 12 of them. They're little short stories. Two of them actually figure into Arthurian mythology, but they're indigenous oral stories from Celtic cultures in England, Brittany, coastal France.
Mm-hmm.
She's retelling them,
Mm-hmm.
and in retelling them, she's actively injecting Christian theology into pieces of them so they'll be more acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
But she's writing them for the rich, powerful, and there are historians who suggest that she may have been the sister of the King of England at the time.
Mm.
But she's one of the few women whose names appears as my name is Marie, I'm from France, and I'm writing these,
Mm-hmm.
whereas most authors are totally, at this time, kind of anonymous.
Yeah.
But she's taking these cultural stories and putting them into English court life, and she's mixing the two traditions, but it's also kind of taking these older versions of what constitutes a moral code or a moral culture, and allowing the kings to say, well, this is how they used to do it, so I'm going to do it the same way, versus I'm going to do it the Roman imperial way necessarily.
Right.
So you're getting mixture from both sides.
Right. Or you're giving some type of a justification for organization and power that comes out of a more indigenous Celtic tradition rather than the Roman, the Roman outside tradition. Yeah, it's interesting that, what I was thinking was, okay, so we've got this assumption that these cultural elements are going to affect AI based on frequency or something, based on the number of times that they're mentioned. Well, then, in that case, how is Chinese AI going to differ from American AI or Western AI or European AI? And if it's, go ahead.
Probably, yes.
Yeah.
To a certain, though, I mean, there is a complexity there in that, I mean, and this gets back to the previous book, I mean, so much of Chinese computer science is, Chinese programming and everything, so much of that text that is written is actually, in English. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all. And obviously, the Chinese approach to AI, they're, it's a little more government driven. I mean, government regulated, sort of. But yeah, I mean, they're going in very interesting places, but they're going in slightly different places. And that's just that's just an issue. It's a thing. They're not doing. I mean, but it is as exactly you're saying. They're combining. I think it would actually be more fair to say they are incorporating stuff that Western AI is not. But they are also getting that whole corpus of, again, the corpus of training materials that, sort of Western LLMs have available to them is also available to, to Chinese LLMs.
Right.
But, the people who are building those training sets in the West aren't really going out there looking for stuff that's, in Chinese.
Right.
Because
Well, and you're right. And so that was what I was kind of getting at, as sort of a generational change from the first generation where they just scraped everything that was available freely on the internet, right?
And then they start stealing stuff.
Then they, right, and stealing the New York Times and all that, to sort of a second generation, which, in America, I think we've been more worried about from the perspective of, are we going to create filter bubbles when Meta, trains on their data, and X trains on their data, and at what point are the sort of base facts of reality going to start to diverge, right? And so along with that, it would seem to me that at some point where, especially an ideologically driven culture, right, or a culture that wants to represent its culture in AI, which the Chinese may at some point decide to do. Well, what about CCP worldview, right? Or even before, even if they abandon the CCP, right? They've got thousands of years of Confucianism, right? And these other sort of organized.
And that's definitely a different worldview. I mean,
right.
I mean, there's a sort of a core sort of split that happened, around, sort of the rise of ancient Greek philosophy and thought happened around the same time as, the sort of the immediate precursors to Confucius.
Right.
And they took very different approaches, to the ancient Greeks, basically with logic specifically. The ancient Greeks were saying, "Oh, I can prove anything," and that means that we've got this sort of mathematics is perfect because it's idealized. Whereas Chinese, sort of the Chinese tradition at the same time came to those same things, and I think we're talking Mencius and the like, who basically, and they say, "Oh, I can prove anything." That means the logic is stupid because the stuff doesn't make any sense that you're proving.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You can prove counterfactuals. That logic is bullshit. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
right. So what's right? So and their and kind of their ultimate cultural commitment at some point is going to inform their idea of what's real and what's not, and what's true and what's not, and kind of what the hierarchy of these things are. And then what if, just by virtue of having a lot of data centers, perhaps, somebody in Tim's part of the world decides, well, we've got a set of truths that we want to hang on to as kind of the basic. The basic percent. So do you end up with a Sharia version of AI? Sorry?
The people in Tim's part of the world invented algebra, so I'm pretty sure they'll be fine.
Well, yes.
Algebra, yeah.
I accept that.
Algorithm.
And I'm not saying, but even,
And alcohol.
right. And sugar. Yep.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
And coffee.
Yep.
What about Al Godel? But if you think of Kurt Gödel, even within mathematics in the 20s and 30s, there is a new framework for how mathematics works, and things that are either self-consistent or not consistent, and how do you stay in a realm where everything is consistent and is, truth versus not, which is a whole nother realm of like scientific truth that most people don't run into or encounter on a daily basis. But what happens when you get into infinities and infinities of infinities, and the world really goes off the rails when you do that.
Well, and even then, the underlying assumptions and the basic stories beneath the stories are not necessarily examined. I don't know what page it is, in the Power of Stories section, Harari says, Marxists tend to view stories as merely a smokescreen for underlying power relations and material interests. According to Marxist theories, people are always motivated by objective material interests and use stories only to camouflage these interests and confound their rivals. Okay, that's Harari saying something about the
Marxism.
Marxists, right? But the Marxists, and it's probably true to a certain point, right? But the Marxists also were committed to Hegel and to and to this idea that history was going somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is
that's
a kind of a layer of reality beneath this, so yes, okay, there are power relations going on, there is bullshitting going on, but if you have an ultimately kind of a teleological worldview, then you're also committed to this idea of narrative.
Well,
right? Basically in the structure, in the rhetorical structure of kind of the way that you understand the universe.
Well, we also see a little bit of the U.S. populist movement is kind of fighting against it, but I don't think they're actively fighting against. They haven't identified it as the thing we're fighting against. But the Christian nationalists, with the nationalism piece aside, feel like Christianity is being attacked and mitigated and downsized, and it's being supplanted with another story. And generally, the boogeyman is the non-Christians are the problem and the fault and all this other stuff going on in the world. But what they don't seem to have perhaps it's a radical idea, but Christianity broadly, and we don't think of it as religion, but capitalism essentially acts as religion, and to a great extent, capitalism has largely supplanted, Christian religion in the United States, to the point that is probably one of the most dangerous things going on. But the Christians aren't fighting against it as this is the thing we need to go against, because the two things are so embedded into the American story now. How do you fight against yourself to save? If Christianity is the thing you want to save, how do you save that while managing to throw over capitalism as
given particularly from the British side, given the Christians that we managed to offload on all, what's missing in that bit of dialogue is there's no anti-Catholic sentiment. Yet you've only had two Catholic prime ministers, the president.
Yeah.
Everybody else.
Anti-Catholic sentiment until the 60s, really. And now it's sublimated into more, anti-Latin American.
But most Catholics are not white.
Yes, that's true today. That's true today. In the early republic, in the colonial early republic, there was a ton of anti-Catholic sentiment. The whole Illuminati conspiracy was anti-Catholic, and the anti-Masonic movement was also largely anti-Catholic. So there are a lot of weird.
The other thing that's happened this week is the. Can't remember whether it's the Nigerian or the Ghanaian Parliament has decided to root out homosexuality. Mm-hmm. They have removed gay people from protected people, in effect.
Huh.
One of the statements I saw of their various parliamentarians happened to be a firebrand woman that's came over a bit like AOC. It's not our culture, it's not us, and we don't want any part of it. And in the Anglican Church, the African section, Guyana, Nigeria, the West Coast, has always been a problem when the Anglican Church has tried to move on, including women priests, women bishops, etc., that you get across the bulk of Europe now. Mm-hmm. And I think, if I remember rightly, we're just about to get first woman Archbishop of Canterbury. You know? Numero uno one.
Mm.
Yeah. So the within a lot of what we've been talking about before I had to take a break, what we've been speaking about since, of course, deserves a West Wing quote. So you're Jenna Jacobs, and you're a PhD in what? English literature.
Storytelling.
Sociology,
Storytelling.
not psychiatry, not
Perfect.
divinity,
Yep.
not even rocket science.
Mhm.
But that's the thing, is it's the story she's telling that give her power and her base. And she has distribution on radio for getting that story out.
Yeah.
Okay, so distribution
I-
on the radio brings us to this to the
There
Plato's
was no
Noble Lie.
internet back then.
Right.
There was no real internet really back then, but
Yep.
close. What you can do now, of course, is you can put Jenna Jacobs, The West Wing, in various quote marks, etc., into Google, and you can get some really ongoing, deep discussions about how right Jed Bartlett was or not. And then, of course, there is a similar one a few episodes later with the American actor that's often a San Francisco cop. He turns out to be Jed Bartlett's parish priest, or was his parish priest, and they were going to execute, and the president had the option of forestalling that execution, and the team to forestall that decide to go sideways and try and get Toby on their side. So Toby ends up by going into Shaw, and they have a wireless practicing the thou shalt not kill, a bit from a Reformed Jewish point of view. Clearly not somewhere that Bibi goes, but you know. And you might deprive them of their freedom, but you can't deprive them of their life. Only God can do that. But
Isn't
and then, of course,
that
you
the
got
opposite? Isn't that exactly the opposite of what Mel Gibson said?
Graham, yeah. I mean, of course, Graham Lindsay is piped up with his "Gay for War" multicoloured T-shirt that looks like it's a Pride protest woolen jersey, and apparently he's been going backwards and forwards to Israel to make sure that this war goes smoothly.
Oh, good. Glad somebody's doing that. So Plato's Noble Lie, right, which kind of comes out of this wide distribution of
Does that noble lie reach down into the level of they're eating the pets?
They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats.
I'm sure.
That's a great song.
I mean, my dog,
or even I've won 3 elections.
my dog just did walk into the room, and I'm sitting here thinking, boy, I am kind of hungry. Actually, for a snack.
Yep. So Plato, he says, imagined that the constitution of his utopian state would be based on the noble lie, a fictional story about the origin of the social order, one that secures the citizens' loyalty and prevents them from questioning the Constitution. We've already been kind of talking about that in the context of, all of these religious myths, but we've got national myths, we've got all of these other kind of cultural or social commitments to truths and narratives that we sort of base our understanding of kind of our identities as a group or a culture or whatever. But that seems to have potentially could have little to do with what is actually true or false, right? So that interests me a lot, right? I mean, and even going back to this question of, do these people who are, I mean, certainly Bibi Netanyahu, who, went to high school in Pennsylvania and,
Yeah.
and is generally understood as being a very secular, cultural nationalist Jew rather than a religious Jew.
Yeah.
So when he says Amalek, what's he doing? Right?
And does the broader public really know what that word is?
Well, the people to whom he's
Well,
speaking
his
certainly
audience,
do.
at least some of his audience does, and then some of the people who hear it will look it up. But I think that it's one of those coded messages. It's a dog whistle in some sense
Mhm.
to the people he's talking to, but totally ignored by all the people he's not talking to, who he really doesn't want to have known, this word. It's
Well,
like,
and there's this very, I mean, there's this kind of very vague justification, right? When Mike Huckabee was asked to explain his understanding of, Israel's right to the land, right? He just, hand waved and it's from 3,800 years ago, or it's this or it's that, or and so this is. I mean, this kind of strikes me as what Harari's talking about in this section.
yeah.
So Greenland's okay then?
Yeah.
Well,
It is interesting.
Greenland is part of the North American plate, right? So by science,
Yeah.
it belongs to the Americans.
Oh no, but the anti-science Republican Party can't take. They can't.
All
They
right, so
can't
we'll have to
use
wait for the
that as part of
Democrats
their
to
power.
annex Greenland.
Don't forget the big populist writer on the history of plate tectonics and that is Naomi Ostrowski, who's rather big on the energy, climate change, and the fuck up from the populist.
Mm.
So they're not going to admit she's right in one book and not in the other.
Interesting.
I mean, it is interesting though, talking about, national myths. I mean, we even talk in our country, or sorry, those of us who are sitting here in the U.S., that we're special because we're based on creed. Everybody else are based on blood and soil and the like. But here it's, anybody, there's the quote, and I think he even made it. Either he repeats it or somebody, or I read it somewhere else in the last couple of days. Ronald Reagan making a point in a speech of like, you can't go to Germany and become a German, but you come to America, you come here and you become an American, and we're all about creed and everything. But sort of so much of our founding, and this goes back one or two books back, was more, we are a bunch of not just Europeans, a bunch of English people, and I mean British people primarily. They saw this as a place for British people to build, farms and have their
Providentially
own
provided place.
Yeah, and that sort of this our founding documents include slavery and stuff pretending that we're big but at the same time whenever I watch there's the wonderful old Schoolhouse Rock videos of We the People, and I tear up. It moves me because that's just so these founding myths.
You're such a nationalist, Bill.
Huh?
You're such a nationalist, Will.
I am an absolute nationalist, except I believe in the creed part of stuff.
Well, that's one of the screwy things is when you look at kind of the long 19th century, the thing that just precedes that is a huge wave of nationalism that causes not one but two world wars. So we seem to have cycled, and I'm trying to figure out exactly what that cycle is, and I'm thinking maybe 150 years, but every 150 years, nationalism seems to,
it wasn't missing in the 19th century. I mean, we did invade Mexico, and
yeah.
So,
but we're becoming nationalistic again, and it's causing wars yet again.
Well, and internal wars. I mean, we're getting there. I mean,
and that's the thing too.
People talking about I mean, I qualify as a legacy American. All right.
Yeah.
I think it's the most disgusting thing I've ever heard of, but it is a major drive in sort of the national discourse right now. Is this idea of, if you've been here for long enough that your great grandparents died in some war.
From the perspective of replacement theory.
Yeah.
We will not be replaced, and it's like, wait, so which way are you having it?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
That nationalism that we're going back to, ethnic nationalism fundamentally, from creedal nationalism, which was relatively coincident with most of the great periods of expansion and strengthening in this country. That's got nothing to do with anything. I'm just ranting.
Well, it is interesting though that whole okay, we're here now, so bar the door kind of element of that. I'm Italian American, but I'm pre-1924 Italian American, right? But it's
so you're OG.
but
maybe there's people in my family would be like,
yeah. So but again, the creed that that we're talking about, I think it initially in colonial America along the Eastern Seaboard was already split, right? Because you had, kind of Calvinism in the Northeast, and then you had kind of more Church of England in the the Tidewater states or colonies, right? And with a little bit of Catholicism in Maryland.
Yeah, in Maryland and Rhode Island.
But and then in Pennsylvania, you began to get this kind of weird, Quaker thing. And in New Amsterdam, before it became New York, they had more languages and religions than anybody. And they even welcomed Jews, actually, before the Dutch lost it. But then then I would argue that by 1763, our creed changed from a religious understanding of our kind of a providential city on a hill, even in the Northeast, kind of thing, to manifest destiny and expansionism. I mean, and the date that I would put on that would be the King's Proclamation of 1763, saying you're not going past the Appalachians, and that was like when the shit hit the fan. Because by that point, we began to understand ourselves as being providentially destined to occupy the entire continent. And I think that's the project that immigrants bought into when they came here. And for the most part, because immigration was necessary to achieve that, the power structure in America went along with it. Although there are several moments when people are expanding westward, when the powers in especially Washington got very nervous that they're going to lose their Americanness, right? The transportation and the communication media are so slow that these people are going to become different from us and are not going to retain that kind of unified commitment.
That was a whole big part of the last book,
I think that was some of what we could have used more of from the last book. Was some of that earlier history, whereas he tended to focus on things well after that point, having been well established.
Yeah.
I liked that early part of that. That early part, he did get into that, though, in the early part of the book. Yeah.
But there's so much more of that story to be told, because there are a lot of, and even a lot of the whiteness that's in America is whiteness that Britain pushed out of its own borders.
Mm-hmm.
That the Irish, the Welsh, the Scots, who broadly came in and peopled a huge chunk of that Appalachian territory,
right
section,
right. And ironically, those are the people for the most part who insist on calling themselves Americans and not buying into any hyphenation at all. So when the Census Bureau has done ethnic maps, right, there's this whole Southern Appalachian belt where people just call themselves Americans and will not fess up to being of any ethnicity, which basically means they're Scots-Irish. But the other thing that's interesting, though, is that there was that kind of behind the scenes, there was sort of this insistence that the creed and the spread of the creed and the power of the creed and everything had to move from east to west, right? It was not legitimate at all for California to be a source of anything, really. So when and my friend Ted Malillo at Amherst College has written about this a lot in a couple of books, that when stuff came in from, I mean, like the Chinese came in from the West, right? And the, and the Chilean miners came up and showed prospectors how to prospect for gold and, and mine and everything, that all of that had to be kind of ignored and sort of papered over, right? Because we don't, because we're very committed to that idea that the source of our civilization is on the eastern side.
Us. Yeah.
The usness, the usness
can you
of it.
imagine how interminably horrible Californians would be if they could have been
It could have been more like that.
if there had been a story or mythology that it's us, California, rather than us as East Coast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How they would be they would just be horrible now.
They would have probably seceded.
If you think Newsom is bad now, like if that mythology transferred, like, and I say this facetiously living in Southern California.
Yeah.
For those watching the video later.
And I'm planning on moving to California in the fall nonetheless. So, but really, I mean, I think.
Oh, is that a done deal? Like, are we gonna,
Yep, pretty much.
I don't know. That means I may have to move, to Minnesota to balance things out.
I wouldn't wish that on you.
I hope you get to avoid the wildfires and earthquakes that drove me away from California.
Yeah, well, my parents are.
I was there for Loma Prieta, and that was
Will,
they were on deep dirt in the Central Valley. So
did you move? Will, did you move from Paradise?
No. I moved from Oakland.
Then the wildfires be damned. Like literally the worst catastrophe in the world, fire-wise in an urban area. 2 blocks from me. And as the Welsh would say, Yamaoheed, I am still here, motherfucker.
Well, there you go. Well, but
it was just too much for me, is all I'm saying.
Will's got a fire in his ancestral vicinity from 1906 and an earthquake, right? So yeah.
What does strike me too is we're talking about, because we've now used the word myth or mythology half a dozen times. I do remember circling it in big bold the first time it appeared in this book. And I don't think has been with us as long, but I would almost say that this book club in the 3.5 years it's been around now, or is it more? It's been a while.
We've been here, I think, yeah.
But it's, the overarching theme seems to be the mythologies we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
And myth appears in if not even in the title of some of the books, certainly as an underlying theme of everything that we're about, which I find really fascinating.
Yeah.
And I was excited when I saw that word show up. I was like, oh, we obviously have picked the right book for this group.
Yeah. Well, and along those lines, the perennial dilemma. I love his little chapter. Every human information network needs to do 2 things simultaneously: discover truth and create order. And I would argue that the first of those is much less central than he would like it to be.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, and I think that's the tension in this book is, where does order and power show up from? Is it from the stories we tell ourselves? Is it from, actual discernible truth? Because there is the truth of religions, which is a truth for the people who ascribe to that, story or philosophy.
Right. And why do we have so much trouble distinguishing one of these types of truths from others.
Well, that's one of the things that kind of divides myth from religion. It's religion if it's your mythology.
Oh yeah, right.
But it's myth if it's someone else's religion.
Right. Right. That's
And
Ricky Gervais's 3,000 atheists versus 3,001 things, religions you don't
You
believe
can
in.
get to Montaigne, all right, or however you pronounce it. Like if he lived in I forget where he said, he'd be a cannibal if he lived in a society where everybody was a cannibal.
Mhm.
He would
Mhm.
be part of whatever that's. He would adopt whatever the cultural myths are of the culture he was part of.
Right. And that's probably true to a great extent. Probably not 100% true, right? So probably not all the way to, post-structuralism and our language, determines us, right? But I think we have to figure out a language and a way of dealing with the idea that, that a lot of these ideas are true 70% of the time or 50% of the time, right? And that when they are true and when they aren't true is something that we ought to examine rather than just, we seem to default to these binaries of it. Is it true or is it false?
yeah, because even in that cannibalistic society, there's at least one bow tie wearing dude who's a vegan. It's gonna happen.
Yep.
And you could have been that guy.
Yep.
Or a gal.
Mhm.
The village vegan, the village vegetarian, just like the village atheist.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So we have 15 minutes left, and we've really gotten through the prologue and the first couple of chapters.
I think we could go at a slower pace than
I think we could go at a little bit slower pace. I think there's a little bit more in here than I expected. And I'm even thinking, as I'm sort of, going through on right above the window that you guys, your faces are in, and I'm looking at my highlights and stuff, I'm seeing other things, like on the page just before the perennial dilemma, this whole idea of the US Constitution and the Ten Commandments and that I think I want to kind of go back and think a little bit more about. One of the things that always blows the minds of my students when in classes, when I ask and I talk about these kind of foundational things, is I always ask them, what's the first commandment? And they inevitably say, thou shalt not kill, which is not accurate.
Not even in the top 5.
Not even in the top 5. Yeah. And so then we get to have this conversation about, well, why does, I am the Lord thy God.
Jim's trying to turn his audio on to say an episode, like 1 or 2 or 3 of the West Wing. Jed walks into the room and says, I am the Lord your God.
Yep.
If we're gonna go through this exercise, we're gonna get that one right.
Mm-hmm.
In the pilot and
am I reading your lips properly?
Yeah.
The pilot's the only episode of the show I ever watched.
I never
you're out of the book club,
I had to not acknowledge it. I remember, there's like, his girlfriend turns out to actually be a call girl, and that's basically all I remember.
Yeah, and that's the package Sam carries with him all 4.5 seasons until he's off the show.
I never watched that. I did watch House of Cards, the first.
That's a good show.
Of that.
Did you watch the British one or the American one, or both?
I tried to watch the British one, but it was too slow for me, so I watched the American one.
Oh, they're both.
Well, obviously all the procedures are different. All the language is different.
I also
the American one doesn't use English at all.
Yes.
And
I also didn't watch the British Office, not because I didn't want to, just because I never do it.
That one's just too harsh. It's the British Office is very difficult to watch.
Well, David Brent is a sad character. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's not so. Yeah. But the things he does to the things these people do to each other. I mean, it's painful funny. It's like
but that's the thing. It's that, and even Scott Adams' Dilbert, like the idiocy that we do to each other is really the underlying thread of both that
Mhm.
you know, his cartoon, and what we really so they're satires that, and even now, I mean, the Office, the American Office was cringy when it came out.
Yeah. Well, they were just redoing a lot of the episodes in
Trying to
the
watch
beginning.
it, trying to watch it with my daughter, who's, you know, 14, 15 now.
Yeah.
It's there's a new level of cringiness because we've now gone through like Me Too,
Mhm.
which makes it even more cringy. And you're
Yeah.
when you rewatch it now, it's like, well, you know,
And that
this
had
is gonna be
significantly
shit.
softened from the British one. Yeah. But it's
Yeah.
the same basic stories, but toned down.
The other thing with the British one is the lead actor is, of course, the baddie in a couple of Johnny Carrier bits. So you
Yeah.
want him to die anyway, and so the airplane's execution at the end, so his wife can go up the ladder, is out of the blue in terms of the UK side.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but the thing that I do feel sorry for you guys about is when there is a lot of upper class stroke perceived perception. Um, yeah. So the BBC a few years back tried to get a number of cultural diverse news people, announcers. And so it was like, we'll start with announcing the names of the programs.
Mm.
And there was, I don't know what his name was, but there was this very Nigerian black guy with a huge accent and a really deep voice. So like Willard White type deep voice in various performances of Othello, or the guy who did Darth Vader
Right.
voiceover,
James Earl Jones.
Errol, yes. And it was so deep, you almost had to adjust the balance on your radio to get it to sound right. I don't think they do it much now, but it lasted a good few years. But the
Well,
other one where you can collect the accents, of course, is In Our Time,
Mm.
where you've got this one consistent person who's got a Cumbrian accent, but was broken by going to Oxbridge.
Mm.
And
Broken.
most of these guests are Oxbridge types. But every now and then, a professor from somewhere sneaks in that is from the northeast or the working southwest or Anglia or something, and it's interesting to hear. Plus, particularly in the last few years, stopped now because he's retired. But in the last few years of production, the program changed tone when the two of the three guests were women, which was quite frequent. And I don't think there ever was three women, but there were occasionally three men. But he did try and balance that out, and he did try to pick people whose it was their subject, I think. So it's not like just one of us turning up. Yeah. So what are we reading for next week?
I think 3, to whatever extent we haven't really covered it this week, and then maybe through
Three
5.
to
3 through
3,
5.
4, and 5.
maybe 5.
3, 4, and 5. Yeah. Because, yeah, I think there are some.
The chapters get longer too, it seems
Yeah.
like. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me is I hear Harari's name reasonably regularly, but it's more for his older stuff. And maybe because this just hasn't been read as widely yet with respect to what's going on in the world in general, politically, or we're too distracted.
He's quite critical of I mean, for an Israeli, he's pretty critical of Israel.
Well, I think that was interesting. That was one of the things that I thought he jumped right into with both feet at the beginning of chapter 3. That I would like to spend a little bit more time talking about and thinking about. Yeah, but maybe that has something to do. Maybe his status as an Israeli alienates some people, and his status as an Israeli who's not 100% on board alienates others.
Yeah.
The other thing that I spotted, I regularly pop into all the usual dirty places like Goodreads just to see what's what, as it were. And by quirk, I went to the page that shows the tags people use just for Chris. And this book has 7,900 or something, and something tab.
Jeez.
And it's over X number of pages. It doesn't even fit on one page. I've done a screenshot of the first page and put that in the group's community chat. And the first few tags are obvious. To read, non-fiction, didn't read, didn't finish, that sort of thing. And most of those have got well above 100. But by the time you get to the bottom of the first page, we're down to 17 as the count. So you go, and it looks like there's a couple of hundred on the first page. I haven't bothered to count. So there's best part of 7,000 tags that have less than 17 people applying.
Wow.
So how useful is that to us? The downside, of course, and it's the same problem as I have here with work in some instances, it's did not finish as DNF, with or without hyphens, did not finish with hyphens, did not finish with no hyphens with space, or did not finish as camel text, or did not finish with no spaces, no application, are all different, of course, as far as good.
Probably the top 5.
What's interesting, I will mention that because that's such a huge data problem, Goodreads has decided they're going to crush all those into one did not finish category and make that a separate shelf for people. And I think that
they're about to. They're
about to. I think some June or July, they're like, if you have these things on your shelves and you want to keep them separate, go in and rename them now, so that, because we're going to, just as a corporate decision, bundle all those together.
The work context, one of the things I do with the facilities management is often go into companies to review their system, and that normally starts with the asset register just to know what they've got, right? And there's 2 stories about that. Ross Perot's company, ECP or whatever it was. EDS.
Electronic Data Systems.
When I did an asset check for EDS, they didn't actually know how many buildings they had in the UK. Right? So you can forget about a number of chillers, fire alarms, chairs, or whatever. And here, one of the companies, English is not their first language, of course. So you get this great green giant dragon, fiery, with a red belly type problem. And to illustrate it to their bosses as to why the asset register needs some update, I said, I've been walked around most of the offices in the main building, recollected all the chair. Easy to do. There are 6 types of chair. However, you think there are 57 because you can't decide whether you put chair with high back or high back chair, whether it's black or some other colour, with or without arms, etc., 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 etc. So they literally
all participate in the Platonic ideal of chair.
Yeah.
They'll have chairness.
And sometimes a couple of the variations was you can't spell chair. So you haven't had
stool
your data people go through and edit the typos even. Forget about whether it's high chair with arms, black on wheels. Right? it's just not even a chair.
Right.
So
Well, and it's interesting because I was just looking, I just put a Harari YouTube video up there in the chat, and I was looking at the list of the Harari YouTube videos, and one of them that I haven't looked at yet is from Big Think, and it's called "We Can Split the Atom but Not Distinguish the Truth," which is an interesting, kind of a statement because we don't even know the truth of the atom, but we can split it, right? So we've got all of this sort of vagueness and misunderstanding about what an atom is, and yet we can manipulate it, which strikes me as a couple of other sort of definitions of knowledge, or one of them having to do with sort of understanding what something is, and the other one having much more to do with being able to use it or act upon it or manipulate it, right? Sort of.
Well, we've mentioned plate tectonics and continental shift, etc., and that history of the one or two people that are on the outliers were getting the equivalent of what the likes of Lomberg and co. have had. So, in terms of trashing reputations and all the rest, the upside, though, is there wasn't and everybody else was being involved in it quite so much. So, you could put Lomberg in and see all the criticism. I think you can still pick up the 39 pages of trashing his book, The Skeptical Environmentalist. That came through from Scientific American. I think I've gone behind a paywall now. But it's interesting to see how you negotiate that debate, which is obviously mentioned all the way on and off all the way through this, as to how to make the argument, and you end up with like John Cook and Cranky Uncle, or Catherine Hayhoe and her Saving Us book. They're not really about climate. They're all about the psychology of presenting something such that you can change somebody's mind in the long term. It's never going to be an overnight revelation. There's no road to Damascus. We want to keep it on a biblical statement. And of course, then there's me, Timothy, or Timotheus, friend of Paul, etc., etc.
Yep.
Yeah.
And with that, it's noon.
There you go.
So next week, chapters 3 and
3, 4,
and then maybe 5 if we can get to it.
Well, last question.
I'll try and live till then at least.
Yes, do try.
Dan, is that yellow chair behind you the same as the cream chair behind Will?
It's an
Did it
IKEA.
come
Actually,
from
it's IKEA
IKEA?
chair.
Yeah,
It's the IKEA recliner. Yeah, it's a great chair, man.
Yeah. I have one in the other room. It's not in the camera view, but this is the one
that's an IKEA love seat there.
I sit in and read regularly. So
Right? That's
Good
the
posture for it.
Brentwood rocker one, right?
It's not, yes, yeah, but it's not really a rocker.
Just a little bit of a
You
spring.
can bounce
It's
a
a
little
little bit of
bit
a
on it.
spring to it.
Poang, I think.
And UK-wise, we've got a suede type fabric and a woven type fabric choice for the cover. And I like the suede one. We made it, oddly enough, like the next spin along was pretty large sheepskin. So I got the sheepskin, threw that over, so I had the suede to suede. So my back and my neck would always be tickled by the sheepskin.
Keeps you awake.
There you go. All right.
Yeah.
Good. Have a good week.
Go forth
Stay
and
safe, Tim.
categorize.
Ciao.